Welcome to the webinar. My name is Anand Akela, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Acalvio Technologies. The title of today's webinar is Securing Medical Devices in Healthcare, an Expert's View. And today's expert is Phil Englert. Phil is the VP of Medical Device Security for Health-ISAC, working with medical device manufacturers to help improve privacy and security while coordinating with health delivery organizations to ensure implementations are practical and achievable. Phil is a thought leader on today's topic and has over 30 years of technical and operational leadership in the healthcare and life sciences. Welcome, Phil. Do you want to add anything to your really great resume?
Well, thanks, Anand. I'm really happy to be here with you and Surreal this morning or this afternoon. Yeah, so for those that don't know me, I joined Health-ISAC about 3 years ago to lead their medical device security initiative, and that also extends into the OT and IoT world. Um, my background as a clinical engineer, maintaining medical devices gave me a big understanding of the breadth of technology and also the clinical environments that are so important to delivering patient care. Thank you.
Thanks again, Phil. Phil is joined by our own VP of Detection Engineering, Suril Desai. Suril had led engineering for industry-leading cybersecurity offerings. He has deep domain expertise in cybersecurity and hold multiple patents. Welcome, Suril.
Thanks, Alan. Good to be on the webinar.
Very good. So before I provide an overview of what will cover in the next 30, 40 minutes, and then hand it over to Phil to get us started, let me direct you to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, bottom of the Zoom webinar window for asking questions. Please feel free to ask the questions as you get them, but we'll take them at the end of Q&A session, which will be at the end of presentation. So today we are going to cover the threats targeting medical devices. Why is medical device security is challenging? What are some of the strategy that are actionable to protect the devices and some of the use cases for the device security? So without any further ado, let me hand it over to Phil. Over to you, Phil.
Sure. Thanks, Anand, again. So let's set the stage just a little bit. And this is a great diagram because it talks about the complexity of the healthcare environment. There are so many different kinds of technologies that are there. And as it says, there's about 10 to 15 medical devices per bed. It changes on, with the acuity levels, with even hospital sizes on that. And the breadth of technology makes it very difficult to categorize and therefore develop strategies that are uniform and equally applied across all of these technology bases. So with that, we also have, the expanding attack surface. So if we think about every boundary that data has to cross, whether it's off a medical device into the EMR or the PAC system, that's a boundary that needs to be protected. More and more today, that those boundaries are being amplified into the cloud environment as well. So it's going out of the control of the healthcare industry into others that are required to help with that. So the threat surface continues to expand as well, and all of these boundaries need to be looked at and controlled in a way. A medium-sized hospital might generate 1.37 terabytes of data a day. That's an amazing amount of data, and that's daily. So it's a tremendous amount of data, and a lot of this originates on these medical devices. And so it then goes from these medical devices into clinical applications, whether they're the EMRs, the PAC system, the DICOM systems, the LIST system for the laboratory, or other hospital information systems. So and then they're shared also externally with government agencies, health information exchanges, and so forth. So again, that complexity, you've got the depth and breadth of the technology itself, You've got layers of communication where this data is sent to business partners to help run the business of delivering patient care. So next, please. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why do attackers target medical devices, right? So the real question is why do attackers target healthcare? And really the element is that 1.37 terabytes of data a day, right? That's a lot of data there. It's a target-rich environment, if you will, right? And so the need to develop protections around healthcare to protect the ability to deliver healthcare. And because it's healthcare, it has an emotional element to it. So we're willing to pay the ransoms to get there. So, why do bank robbers rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do hackers attack healthcare? Because that's where the money is, right? And it's there. So the medical device element is, particularly if you look back at the legacy stuff, you find that they are missing typical controls that you find with traditional IT elements. They may not have really solid authentication or even authorization. Sometimes devices boot, and when you log in, you've got root access to it. They may not have encryption, and because manufacturers want to develop these things, particularly legacy devices, to operate in any environment that they can think of, they've often got open and unused ports and protocols that may not be as robust as we would like them today. So, and the other piece of that is medical devices often look like just a Windows box or a Linux box on the end of the wire for a hacker. They may not be able to tell that they're actually, you know, loading ransomware onto a medical device, a clinical workstation. It may just look like as I said, a Windows box. So the advantage is they find these boxes, these endpoints that don't have robust controls on them, so that makes them good access points. It also makes them good exfil points for that. And often these devices have lateral systemic access to other parts of the network, and so that allows for vertical and horizontal movement within the network itself. Next slide, please. So good. So the attack paths, right? They look very different depending on the kinds of technologies that are there. But this slide really demonstrates that it's not one technique that is being exploited. It's several different techniques, right? So it could be living off the land where actors gain access to a network. They just sit in there maybe for months, right? Just kind of getting the lay of the land and looking at that. These medical devices and other IoT devices are often excluded from in-depth scanning, right? Or they're segmented from normal monitoring within the healthcare sector. So that makes it an easy place for somebody to just get in, look around, see what's there, see what access they have. They can go undetected for longer periods of time on that. So whether it's gaining a passive foothold in a PAC system that allows you um, to then access other systems like the radiology information system, or other patient data containing systems like the EMR, even leveraging into some of the finance and the back office elements, whether it's the ability to exploit a bug on remote access and gaining access through or to other elements, whether it's the HR database, or laterally moving away from, out of a device to the nurse's station, then maybe down to the physical or the central monitoring servers, that have dual NIC cards that provide some layer of isolation. But once they're out of those, they're assumed to be in the network and friendly, and then have good access there. The other element is the DICOM gateways. We see that a lot. They can inject. It's been demonstrated that folks can inject code into an image and then these images get transferred and the code gets launched, much like bad code in a Word document or an Excel file, or injected over using SQL methodologies. So the types of security risks are numerous, right? And we've got legacy. We've got another slide coming up on that, right? So, but one thing I'll say is medical devices take a long time to develop and get approved through the regulatory pieces. It can be 4 to 6 years, from development. So oftentimes, devices are sold today, they're still selling legacy devices. I was talking with one of our members, and they were telling me that for a significant imaging modality, one manufacturer was only still selling Windows 10, did not have Windows 11 delivery date on their product roadmap, which was really kind of startling to me thinking about that. And then the competitor, one of the competitors, they were still selling Windows 10 OSs on these imaging devices. They did have it on their roadmap, but their delivery into the patient care environment was still 18 months down the road. So we're buying legacy devices here, legacy OSs. It's a challenge to get that done. Software vulnerabilities are huge. And one of the challenges is when manufacturers moved away from proprietary software and started using commercially off-the-shelf software, they inherited all of the bugs that were there. And because of the regulatory environment, because of the need to develop uh, applications and technologies that would work in a wide variety of clinical environments and on different kinds of networks, there were a lot of vulnerabilities. I looked at a large clinical diagnostic device that had over 5,000 vulnerabilities on it. So it's not a small thing. And that's one device in, let's say, an environment that might have several thousand of these devices. So the order of magnitude is huge, right? Um, oh, I'm sorry. If you can go back real quick, Cyril. Thank you. So there's a couple of things I wanted to say. One of the things, the FDA just dropped the updated pre-market guidance in there, and one of the doors that they closed was the previous, where they in the post-market guidance they had identified um, uncontrolled and controlled vulnerabilities. Uncontrolled vulnerabilities meaning those that uh, had uncontrolled risk, right? That created patient harm, significant harm to the thing. They had required in that 2014 post-market document that manufacturers monitor for those, announce within 30 days if they identified those, and then resolved within 60 days. Given the long V&V cycle, sometimes 4, 6, 8 months for verification and validation in medical devices, that didn't seem really reasonable. It wasn't enforced equitably or consistently around that. But in the 2025 pre-market guidance, they defined those devices that had vulnerabilities that were not uncontrolled, but were controlled, but still had risk, that they had to have a plan. The manufacturers have had a plan to update or patch those devices in a reasonably justifiable regular cycle. So while they did not define distinct parameters, right, they did state that the manufacturers have to do that within a period of time. So if you're a healthcare organization, you can begin to ask your manufacturers, you should be asking your manufacturers, what is your update and patch cycle? When should we be looking for that? And how will you notify us of which vulnerabilities have been addressed as you do those, right? So think again, too, we've got lack of transparency in supply chain. Many manufacturers would love you to believe that their equipment works by magic and they're the only ones that can maintain it. Nobody else has to do it. In the biomed world, those that do the clinical maintenance operations for these devices, there has been an ongoing feud, if you will, between hospitals, third-party maintainers, and manufacturers about the right to service and the right to maintain devices on here. And the supply chain transparency is one element in that. Health-ISAC, I have to mention, I'll put in a plug. We're developing what we call SBOM Link, which is a resource that healthcare delivery organizations can tap into and get linked directly to either the login or the access points for a number of manufacturers where they're storing their SBOM and their security information. So look forward to more news on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the top security risk, we talked about legacy stuff and it's there, but it's not just Windows that's on this slide, right? There are Linux vulnerabilities that are out there. There are iOS, or excuse me, yeah, Apple iOS vulnerabilities that are out there and are known. And even secure operating systems like Rust now have been found to have vulnerabilities that are there, usually around those kinds of pieces of that. So won't spend a lot of time here, but PAX and DICOM exposures since 2017 are up. One Vetter Labs as did a study on that since 2017. PAX and DICOM exposures are up 246%. They're up 27% in just the last 2 years. And one of their honeypots, right, a deception technique that Cyril is going to talk to you about later, right, had 1.6 million attacks in a year, right? So this was on a DICOM honeypot. So that's about one attack every 20 seconds. So the threat is real. The threat actors are active and motivated. And this is an important element to be aware of and keep track of. So next, please. So kind of the top security risks and vulnerabilities. A lot of folks come out with these CWEs, the top 10 CWEs. You know, MITRE has its, SANS puts it out, OWASP has their list, right? If you look at these, one of the things that you'll notice, right, is that they have a lot to do with in medical devices, particularly around credentials and authentication and validation of that. So you can see use of hard-coded passwords, use of hard-coded credentials, right? Improper authentication, insufficiently protected credentials, so unprotected transport of credentials. So this is a repeated thing, and particularly in these legacy devices here. So the vulnerabilities are real. One of the nice things about CWEs, and I've been looking at these for a long time, because when I look back at that diagnostic analyzer, right, that had 5,000 vulnerabilities, that's a little too many to get your head around, right? But if I break it down to CWEs, there's 136 CWEs associated with those 5,000 vulnerabilities, right? So then I can go back to the manufacturer if I'm a healthcare organization and say, hey, you know, this is the most common. You've got very weak credentials all over the place. You've got unprotected or insufficiently protected credentials. You know, how about you work on fixing those for our devices and update those that are in our environment and see what we can do about that. So I think being able to categorize, you know, things in much more succinct groupings allows us to manage them better, to allow us to develop strategies around that. So the CWE is useful for threat modeling, as we'll see, but it's an element that's worth looking at and managing. We're looking at in our in one of our Medical Device Security Council groups is looking at how to do the risk scoring in medical devices, and CWEs is coming up more and more in that, so that folks can understand what that looks like. Next, please. So again, insecure protocols, we've mentioned this before, right? We talk about DICOM up 247% in the last 10 years, 27% in the last 2 years, right? So, and it's not that the devices are not static, right? They're increasing. We've got more DICOM workstations out. We're sharing data with more people, particularly imaging data. And imaging has gone, expanded well beyond the traditional X-ray images or the CTs, right? To now there's pathology images and other kinds of modalities that are being used. So, and they're all using this DICOM protocol. So, one of the elements is DICOM workstations, right? 32% of them contain critical unpatched vulnerabilities, right? But that's not just DICOM. The pump controllers that are found in healthcare have 26% of them have unpatched vulnerabilities on that. So oftentimes we're waiting for the manufacturers to give us that. Keep your applications up to date as often as you can on this. It's critical, just like keeping the phones or your home computers updated, keeping your workstations, keeping your applications that you're using for clinical studies updated is super important as well. The other very common protocol is HL7, which, like DICOM, did not have secure transport in its thing, right? And in its standard setups. So it's kind of interesting. It uses, TCP/IP, as transports, things like LLP and FTP and even SOAP in the standard HL7 v2, which is out there. 95% of healthcare still uses HL7, and that's mostly for the legacy applications. There is an improvement on that. FHIR, right? Fast healthcare interoperability resources, FHIR, right, is the replacement, but it's not a plug and play replacement. It doesn't fully cover all of the application needs that HL7 does. The other thing is HL7 was a standard, but when it was first developed, it was so loose that every manufacturer, right, developed their own flavor, if you will, of HL7. So interoperability, while it was there to create it, right, wasn't as effective or as efficient as we would have hoped, right? FHIR uses OAuth 2 and TLS, so it does have improved uh, secure transport protocols, right? And it's web enabled, so it has some advantages there. A lot of healthcare organizations are transitioning some of their applications to it as they can. But again, a lot of these legacy things are not FHIR compatible, and so HL7 will persist like legacy medical devices for a number of years. So, and we talked a little bit about supply chain risks. This is the huge piece in here, right? We all remember the kinds of vulnerabilities that are everywhere. They have high applicability and very little attribution. Log4j being one of the most recent examples, right? Where we knew this library code was in a lot of stuff. We just didn't know exactly what and where. And more importantly, we didn't know to what extent, if log4j was exploited, what that would do to the functionality of the devices. So software bill of materials is very important, as is the MDS2 for medical devices, right? And if you're not familiar with the MDS2, that's the manufacturer disclosure statement for medical device security. It started back in 2004. It had about 13 questions there. What kind of controls were on medical devices? The current version, I think 2019 is the last version, has 176 things. And I call it the pre-flight checklist for security controls. It really talks about the hardening on devices. Is the control available? If so, what does that look like, and other details on that. So if you can obtain the MDS2 during the procurement process, if you can also obtain the software bill of materials, you can better understand the risks that you're introducing to your environment and develop strategies to manage those risks, whether it is understanding what's the regular patch and update cycle for your devices and negotiating that with your manufacturer partners. For the manufacturers, right, having this information available for your customers is important. And certainly for anything that goes through the new FDA requirements since March of 2023, right? A software bill of materials is required to be submitted and also made available to your customers for those devices. It's not grandfathered into the legacy devices, but having it there for that allows you to fulfill your mandatory requirements of managing, monitoring and managing software vulnerabilities in the products that you have fielded. That is a requirement of the pre-market guidance, or the post-market guidance, excuse me, that goes back to 2014. Next slide, please. And I'm going to take a break while we turn it over to Anand for the poll question.
I'm going to launch this poll and keep it on for 30 seconds. Please feel free to respond to that, and we'll share the results real quick. Red team exercise are less effective at identifying risk to medical devices. Why? I see a trend in the response. Another 10 seconds. More than half of you have answered. Very good. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results real quick. Cyril or Phil, any comments on the results? I mean, it was obvious, but all of the above is what people are responding. Majority 79%, so which is good. Okay.
So I think it's interesting that it's all of the above, but that speaks to the diversity of the technologies, right? So there are different reasons for different technologies, and so when you look across the span of a equipment population, particularly in healthcare, some reasons apply to different segments of that equipment population.
Very good. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and Cyril, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Anand. So I'll take a few. Phil did a very excellent overview of the healthcare and the medical device security risks. So thanks, Phil. What I'll do is I'll just talk about 4 different attack scenarios on how attackers are actually exploiting these medical devices for an offensive campaign. So the first one is related to ransomware, which is of course one of the top risks that target healthcare. And so now the question is, how is the attacker leveraging medical devices as part of an exploit sequence involving ransomware? So there's typically initial access. And so the initial access can be of multiple ways. One of them is phishing, which is one of the most popular ways for the attacker to get in an initial beachhead into the healthcare sector. Once they get into the organization, then the attacker is looking to deploy the ransomware. But in order to deploy the ransomware, they need to get a pivot point and they need to propagate. So one of the things that attackers are doing is they look for credentials, and these credentials can be privileged credentials. For example, it could be a service account, and the service account could get them access to one of the type of equipment in the environment. So certain threat groups, once they get access to the credential through offensive tools like Mimikatz or even Bloodhound, which targets Active Directory, they can leverage these credentials and then they specifically target a medical device because of the security challenges associated with them. So it gives them a pivot point to mount further steps in the offensive kill chain without too much of risk of getting detected. So they find and enumerate such a device, and then from there on, they go and actually deploy a ransomware. And then that ransomware in turn goes and does this regular function of encrypting data across multiple key assets, high value assets in the environment. And there are many ransomware groups, for example, ALF-V or Black Cat, which is one of the more insidious groups, has actually been known to do these type of offensive techniques. So it creates a significant challenge from a security point of view. And so that's sort of one attack sequence. Now, if you take a different example, this is the type of attack called as man-in-the-middle attacks. As we know, these are very difficult to detect because fundamentally here the idea is that the attacker is not actually having a direct foothold on any endpoint in the environment. They are just sniffing in the middle for network traffic. So many of these medical devices, for example, a infusion pump, requires a communication protocol, like Phil was discussing earlier, and that communication protocol needs instructions from the hospital management system. So these are the standard security communication pathways that are required for that device to function. What attackers are doing is that some of these protocols are unencrypted. And so because they are unencrypted, the attacker gets a foothold in the enterprise environment and they are able to sniff the clear text traffic between the hospital management system and the infusion pump, which is effectively their man in the middle. And once they inspect the traffic, they can even manipulate it. So the hospital management system would have sent a certain instruction, but the attacker is sitting in the middle. So they intercept the request, they change the instruction, and so they can actually go and send a different instruction to the actual infusion pump, which would not know that this came from an adversary. It would assume that this came from the hospital management system, and that can have significant impacts from a patient care point of view. So remote manipulation of infusion pumps is a significant risk. We'll talk about another attacks vector that we have seen, which is the exploit of devices. For example, an MRI device is having a lot of imaging data. And so that imaging data is always interesting to an attacker. Ultimately, it represents sensitive medical data that is information of value for the healthcare, and is also useful for the attacker from a PHI point of view. So what attackers are doing is they leverage some of the legacy operating system characteristics that Phil spoke about earlier. So for example, let's say there is a Windows 7 device or a Windows XP device. It would have protocols like SMBv1 available, and that SMBv1 protocol is known to have known vulnerability exploits like Eternal Blue. So attackers leverage Eternal Blue for lateral movement to get access to the medical device. Once they have access to the device and they elevate privileges, get access to not only the credentials for further lateral movement, but they also get access to the data that is stored on the device, and then they can exfiltrate it. So this is activity that is of significant consequence from a defender's perspective. The last one is an attack scenario which talks about denial of service attacks. As we know, denial of service attacks can always be difficult to defend against, where effectively the attacker is leveraging the fact that let's take the case of a smart ventilator. Ultimately, these devices need communication from remote sources. So there are instructions required to be sent for the device to operate. The attacker can behave as if it is a source of the instruction and send multiple types of offensive payloads. One of the payloads is to do what is called as denial of service. So you send, a flood of packets to the device, and that might cause a device to crash. So that is one way of creating harm. But there is even more deliberate offensive activity that can be done. So attackers who understand the actual payload packet sequence can then send a crafted malicious instruction which will be actually leveraged, which will be interpreted by the device. And then that device can then be told to load up a malware, or it can be told to perform instructions that were not originally intended as part of the actual execution sequence for that device. So these type of risks create a significant problem from a security point of view as far as protecting devices is concerned. Phil? You might be on mute.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So defense in depth is super critical here for healthcare in particular, right? So we talk about preventing patch management, network segmentation. So again, the Health Sector Coordinating Council has a patch and update group called CUP, Cyber Update and Patching Group, that is coming out with a framework for healthcare delivery organizations to help manage that. The HSCC model contract language for MedTech also addresses many of the elements so that you can negotiate those time frames and responsibilities around patch management. Network segmentation is key, and I think this is a really important one. A lot of medical device networks were originally very flat. They were just, separated into, admin networks and medical device networks and other networks. So there might have been 3 or 4 segments. Being able to separate devices into a number of different segments so that if there is an attack, you don't have to shut down the whole network. You don't have to cripple things that are not impacted so that you can continue to deliver healthcare is an extremely important element. Network traffic analysis is very important, even though there is a reluctance to actively scan medical devices for fear of tipping them over. There are a number of tools that allow for passive monitoring that you can identify normal traffic patterns and flag on anomalous traffic events. So that's very important as well. The deception piece, we think about 1.6 million tags in a year is tremendous. So having the ability to collect that data, how you're being attacked, and then help you devise protections and responses to that is very important for that. So our typical response is to just disconnect a network or an entire hospital or healthcare system from the outside world. Because we are so interconnected and interoperable, that may actually create more risk today than we solve by disconnecting. So I think we have to be, to use the healthcare analogy, much more surgical when we start disconnecting things from the network so that we can continue to provide patient care in that. So and then having response plans. What am I going to do when this device is attacked and I have to take it offline? How am I going to continue to deliver patient care? How am I going to restore services on this? If you think of cyber as just a failure mode, it's a way for things not to work or work as expected when needed, right? Then you can devise, much like engineering, you can devise responses and restoration plans and how you're going to respond. And the difference is oftentimes, and it gets more and more convoluted, is medical devices are individual boxes that are connected to the larger network. And so that has to be thought through all the way around. So having layered defense is very important. Next slide. I won't spend a lot of time here, but if you're using embedded devices on here, MITRE has come out with the embed healthcare framework. It is a tremendous tool for threat modeling, for understanding what kind of threats can be applied to these technology, and then devising the responses for that, or looking for the protections. You can use this in conversations in the procurement cycle to make sure that your manufacturer partners are providing you the kinds of protections that are necessary to manage the risks that you're looking to introduce as you bring their technologies into your environment. Next slide, please. And again, this is what the architecture looks like. Even simple embedded devices, right, have a lot of different layers, and this talks about that. And if you think about, as we even go into the home network, where a lot of these devices that have limited interfaces, some very specific functions, right, that can't be managed as traditional IT endpoints, still have, you know, these kinds of functions at the system layer, at the hardware layer, and at the application layer, right? And then you've got to include the multiple interfaces that connect them to the cloud environment that delivers this data back to the patient and often to the caregivers as well. So all in there. Again, embed is a very good tool for eliminating some of the noise of the MITRE attack to those devices that are utilizing embedded technologies and have limited resourcing available on them. So applying patches is a challenge, right? This is, we're not, if you think about medical devices, if you look at the tech specs on medical devices, you will see that they're just a step below, you know, mil spec, DoD specifications. They are designed to operate in very hostile environments. And they're designed to do two things, right? They're designed to be accurate, and they're designed to be reliable. And this doesn't lend itself to being very flexible as today's current cyber environment demands. So again, utilize the model contract language, look for the cyber update and patching output on this, right? And ask your manufacturer partners, you know, what is your normal update and patching cycle, right? And how do I know, right, when vulnerabilities are introduced or realized, right, in the environment, and which ones I need to address, and which ones you will have addressed when you do these patches and updates, so that you can then understand, you know, the risks that you have to then manage for, what vulnerabilities are still present on there. So this is routine maintenance. This is like changing the oil in your car, changing the filters, you know, in your air conditioner, right, without maintaining the software to today's environment, right? It's going to fail. And when it does, it usually is in the most inconvenient time with sometimes catastrophic results. So lack of security tooling, there is an understanding that we have that medical devices are very fragile, very brittle, if you will. That is really not the case. I've worked with several organizations that consistently scan their medical devices, that are looking at these things. They're not tipping them over. Yes, occasionally they do, and you have to be able to identify those. And obviously you want to find those in your pieces, but you know, you can't put agents on them without changing, or without concerns about changing the operating characteristics of devices. But again, think about how we are managing them. These new tools to detect, to manage, are far more accurate today than they have been in the past. So if you don't have passive monitoring tools worth looking at to be able to understand your entire environment, and not just the medical devices, there's a lot of IoT and OT elements that are in your healthcare environment that need to be considered and managed as well. So HHS in both the HICCUP and the JSP has a lot of different recommendations. This is a public-private consortium of groups that are looking at this. They're looking at the threats. They're working on solving these problems on here. So, you know, stay attached with not just HHS, which has their cyber, I'm sorry, it's just slipping me, their cyber requirements, their cyber goals on that. So we know social engineering, we know that AI is giving our adversaries, a leverage on this, but we can utilize those tools again in protecting that and countering that as well. So um, deception is a solid method to protect medical devices. It has demonstrated, certainly the example that I called out earlier demonstrates that is an effective way to monitor without having impacts on the clinical functionality of that. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Cyril.
Thanks, Phil. And so, yes, so, to Phil's point and on the value of deception for medical device security, attackers are also leveraging a lot of AI for doing the exploit sequences that we discussed. So for example, the attack scenarios that we saw in the discussion earlier, some of them can be automated using LLMs. And so once the attacker uses LLMs, you can generate lots of different derivative forms of attacker techniques. So there has been extensive research from industry experts like Gartner, which have been looking at what the impact of AI on the adversary will be from a security point of view. And so the analysis indicates that traditional reactive detect and respond approaches are fundamentally no longer sufficient. And the main reason for that is they're looking at a priori knowledge of the threat. So you need to know the attacker's TTPs to be able to write a detection rule. If the attacker's TTPs continue to evolve, then a TTP-centric detection approach is no longer sufficient. Instead, the approach that is based on proactively identifying the goal of the attacker, and the goal of the attacker is very well defined. They need, in a healthcare environment, sensitive data, high value assets. So if one can set traps for the attacker based on the goals instead of the methods, then one can actually detect those threats even as they evolve. So that's the benefit of preemptive cyber defense, which is effectively an innovative way of being able to defend against medical device security risks. So now, from a deception point of view, the whole idea is to set a set of strategic traps for the attacker. These traps can be of many types and placed at many places, but all with an overall strategy in mind. And the high-level strategy is twofold. You want to detect the threat early in the attack lifecycle, and you want to divert the attacker away from the real device towards the deceptive ones. Now, in order to do that, one can create various forms of deceptions. These can involve what is called as decoys in the network, and those decoys can represent, for example, a medical device. Leading the attacker towards the decoy can be done through other forms of deception. So, for example, on endpoints, one can deploy what is called as honey tokens or breadcrumbs, which are deceptive credentials that lead the attacker towards a decoy device instead of the real. One can also deploy deceptions in Active Directory. So attackers who are trying to do enumeration in Active Directory will find a deceptive user account or a service account and go after that and get deflected. So that's basically the idea. Now here is an example of a set of decoys that have been deployed for protecting medical devices. So one of the things that attackers target from a medical device point of view is the web interface. So that because there are well-known OWASP exploits associated with web interfaces. So the defender can create decoys that look like various forms of medical devices, place them in the network, make them look realistic. Now, when the attacker tries to find these devices, they will find these decoys. Any attempt to go after these decoys can result in an alert. So I'll show you, and from a response point of view, there are various forms of response that are possible. One can actually, once you know that there is a high fidelity alert from a decoy, then one can isolate the endpoint or you could block the user. But there are also novel forms of response. For example, you can place additional decoys in the environment to slow down the attacker in real time. And so that way it's a form of engaging with the attacker and letting them continue in a controlled environment while the defender and the security operations is buying time for actually terminating the attacker access. So that's basically the type of response actions recommended by HHS. I'll show a quick scenario into how such a solution can work in practice. We'll walk through a quick demo video. And so in the interest of time, I'll just start with the attacker sequence.
The attacker's goal
So
is to
one
exfiltrate
second
PHI data.
while I mute
The attacker performs reconnaissance.
this. So this is basically a scenario where the attacker is trying to get in and they're trying to go and perform a exploit sequence. So the attacker's goal is to get after a medical device, and this is effectively an MRI device. And then from that device, they want to further laterally move in the environment. So here is a case where the attacker is doing enumeration, looking for a MRI device and looking for a legacy OS version. So they use tools like Metasploit to go and perform that type of an enumeration. They find that this type of activity is possible. So they attempt to go and craft an exploit against it. But that device is actually a decoy. And so if there is a decoy device, immediately a deception solution can raise an alert. It can surface the evidence that this is being done by the attacker. So for example, a Calvio provides such a solution, and that solution would surface in the alert screen the information about what the attacker did, what was the exploit sequence, Eternal Blue was attempted. Now the SOC gets an evidence of what is being performed by the attacker, and one gets the ability to stop that type of an attack and also derivative attacks of that nature. And so now if the attacker continues and they try to go and perform additional exploits, for example, they try to go and after a DICOM device, they can further be slowed down using a deception solution. So one can place a PAX decoy in the environment. The attacker is continuing their exploit sequence. They go after PAX, and then they eventually want to exfiltrate the data. So as part of the attack sequence, they look for credentials. They try to leverage the credentials for further lateral movement. Now they're going and getting access to credentials for a PAX server. They try to log in into a PAX server. This is actually a decoy device. So this is a deceptive entity. And so the attacker thinks that this is real. It can be made to look like real. It looks like just like any other PAX system. And so they're continuing their activity, but it's all a monitored environment, deceptive environment. And so now, again, the defender will get evidence of what is being done by the attacker. So you can see the actual alerts, you can see what the attacker did and how they performed their exploit sequence. So that's basically an example, a concrete example of how deception can add value from a medical device security point of view. In summary, to broaden beyond medical devices, the overall risks for healthcare from a security point of view are of many types, from social engineering to ransomware, to loss of data and insider threats. These are sort of the top risks that healthcare organizations run. And so for these risks, Phil, do you want to add any comments on this?
No, so there's the typical risks, or the typical impacts, of data, right? The CIA triad, right? The confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of data, right? But in healthcare, when you lose the availability of data or of the equipment, you lose the ability to treat your patients, which is your mission. And so that makes that very important on here. And so the impacts are not just the vulnerability within the component, as a CVSS score would go, you have to consider the impacts on your ability to carry out your mission.
Thanks, Phil. And so now from a deception use cases perspective, deception has use cases for protecting healthcare even beyond specifically to medical devices, various other use cases. So, for example, just ranging from detecting unauthorized use of credentials, which is one of the identity risk is a top risk for any organization, including healthcare, and then moving to other specific risks like insider risk, the defending against AI on the attacker side are all cases that can be protected using deception tech. This is in addition to protecting the high value assets in a healthcare organization. So that's basically a quick summary of today's discussion. We can open up for questions.
Thanks, Cyril. Please feel free to submit your questions, even though we have a few minutes left. We'll make sure that we respond to your questions if we don't get to them during the next few minutes. So use Q&A button to submit your questions. Phil has already responded to a few. Let me ask the first question. I have enforced strict segmentation policies for my medical device VLANs. Am I still at risk? If so, what is the risk?
Phil, would you like to go?
Sure. So, segmentation is really a method of obfuscation, if you will. It's hiding your devices. So the weaknesses, the controls that are not present, the vulnerabilities that are present are still there. So while segmentation can help um, with protecting access to some degree of those devices, it doesn't compensate fully for the lack of controls that may not be present on those devices. So the vulnerabilities still exist. The impacts can still exist. The segmentation may give you the ability to limit the blast radius, if you will, so that you're not taking down all of your devices. You're just taking down a smaller number of them.
All right, so let's take another question or two. We have a couple of minutes. I have 1,100 makes and models in my healthcare organization. How can your deception technology cover such a large variety of devices?
Right. So, maybe I can talk a little bit about that. So from a Calvio solution point of view, what we have done is that we have a deception platform that the platform needs to be made extensible because any large healthcare organization has many devices, many makes, many models. So effectively, you cannot pre-build every combination. So one has to design the platform for extensibility. That's what Calvo's platform Shadowplex does. So which has the ability to actually in the organization during the deployment, one can customize the set of pre-built decoys to make them look like any device make and model. That way you can get additional coverage.
All right, there's another question that just came in. Are you observing threat actors currently targeting medical devices? If not, why? When do you think you will see this materialize? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, maybe Phil can talk about it. If I can give some comments. So the idea is that, to Phil's point, ultimately there have been lots of threats that have been targeting medical devices because they represent there are different categories of attackers. So the attackers who are looking for legacy OS versions will find these devices and are targeting them because they know that the vulnerabilities are associated with it, like Eternal Blue. We are seeing from our deception platform experience these type of devices raising alerts for attacks ranging from malware to ransomware, which are trying to target legacy protocol exploits. And in general, from industry analysis also, there are many such risks that are being seen.
Okay, very good. We are at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thanks again for your time today. If we couldn't get to your questions, then we'll ensure that we respond via email. After the webinar ends, a short feedback survey link will appear in your browser. We'll appreciate your feedback. And as I mentioned in response to some of the questions, we'll send the recording and the slides to all of you guys after the webinar later today or tomorrow morning. Thanks again, and have a great day. Thanks, Phil and Cyril.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.